The good news is the president didn't unilaterally announce today that the United States is leaving NATO. The bad news is that that's actually news, because there was a realistic possibility that he might have tried to do that today. NATO is a 69-year-old alliance that was founded in 1949 while the planet was still reeling from World War II. Soviet Union, of course, lost millions of people in World War II, but they also emerged from the war aggressive and expansionist with a goal to spread or impose Soviet-style communism anywhere they could all over the world. And so, NATO, an alliance of countries that agreed to stick together behind one key pledge. Anyone attacks any one of us, then they attack all of us. That's the basic idea of NATO. All members of NATO are obliged to respond if any one member of NATO is attacked. That's the idea. That mutual defense pledge among NATO countries has only been invoked once in the 69-year history of the alliance. Once. After 9/11, when we invoked it after that attack and our NATO allies came to our aid. NATO was initially set up in 1949 as a dozen nations, including us. Over the years, it has expanded to now include 29 countries. And whether it's because it's expanded to 29 countries or whether it's just because the thing still exists, NATO, you should also know, is the bane of Russia's existence. And if you want to dig right down into the spinal column of Russia seeing itself in opposition to the West and in opposition to what we used to call the free world, it's NATO. I mean, if you gave Vladimir Putin a magic wand and one wish, he would wish for the dissolution of NATO. Or that he was taller, one of the two. So today, President Trump did not blow up the NATO alliance. Congratulations! He did use the NATO meeting as an occasion to publicly insult and lie about these countries, our fellow NATO members, who until about a year and a half ago used to be our closest allies in the world. Then, having arrived late, he proceeded to walk out early so he could reassert to the press his positive feelings about Vladimir Putin and his excitement about their forthcoming summit in a few days. So here's my question. Actually, I have a bunch of questions, but here's the first one. If, say, you find yourself in the middle of what you think might be a fundamental reshaping of the international order, one that appears to be happening quickly and it appears to be wildly to the detriment of your beloved country and the West, and you think that might be happening for the worst possible reasons, what's a girl to do with that? What's a citizen to do with that information? Joining us now for the interview is one of the most experienced American diplomats walking the earth, former U.S. NATO ambassador and former Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland. Ambassador Nuland, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me,
I've looked forward to talking to you for a long time.
Thank you.
What would change in the world if NATO did go away? I mean, NATO has shaped the world since World War II. Can we imagine what would happen if President Trump decided to act on his plainly hostile feelings toward NATO and if he tried to end it or extract us from it?
Well, first and foremost, the United States would be all alone when it faced any strategic challenge out there in the world. As you said, the only time NATO invoked its mutual protection was after we got hit in Afghanistan from forces in Afghanistan. And it wasn't even our idea to invoke Article 5. It was our NATO allies who said, you've been hit. We want to come and help you. So we would be all alone in any circumstance. You know, President Trump himself put out a national security strategy that said, we've got to wake up because we've got a strategic competitor in Russia, in China. He could have used these 2 days to pull the family together and say, how are we going to deal with that? And instead, he spent the time attacking the family.
Do you think that President Trump actually had anything to do with that national security strategy? Doesn't it seem like H.R. McMaster, who was then the national security advisor, got that done and then got fired, and President Trump probably has no idea what was in that?
You know, it's pretty bizarre as a 32-year veteran of the U.S. government that we now have governance where not only is the president issuing and signing documents that then he publicly takes positions opposed to, every single member of his cabinet is in a 180-degree different place than he is. We have Pompeo, we have Bolton, we have all of them warning about Russia, but President Trump believes this is going to be the easiest meeting for him to do this week.
What could go wrong? I mean, what's the worst case scenario for Trump's meeting with Putin in a few days? You have spent time with Vladimir Putin.
I have been support staff in meetings with President Putin. He is a very wily guy. He will have studied President Trump and what makes him happy and what makes him move. He will have watched very carefully the Singapore summit with Kim Jong-un, where that was also supposed to be a summit where they just got to know each other and then the hard work would get done. And instead, our president comes out and announces the suspension of a major military exercise, and it's not really clear what we get back from the DPRK. So I think clearly Putin is thinking about all the things that he wants. He wants President Trump to make good on his pledge that, or his belief that Crimea ought to be a part of Russia. So
that Russia ought to be rewarded for invading another country and taking part of their territory, by the U.S. recognizing that and saying that's fine.
Exactly. And, you know, watch out for Alaska next, because they might want that back, right? So that would be one piece. You know, we know that the Russians are now violating the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. We had banned nuclear weapons at that range, and now the Russians are cheating. So he may very well say to President Trump, hey, we don't need this treaty at all. Why don't we both break out of it? And that just rewards him very much. He may say, hey, you've done your job in Syria. Why don't you get out now and I'll take care of Iran and we'll keep Assad in power. And we know that President Trump has been talking
inclined toward that outcome anyway.
Absolutely. And, you know, the Russians will say, we'll keep Iran to a dull roar in Syria, but this is the same country that has used Iran as its foot soldiers in this campaign to strengthen Assad and to keep him in power. So the notion that they're going to keep him in check is pretty hard to imagine. So there are a lot of things that Putin wants. He may want sanctions relieved, of course, you know.
I mean, speaking hypothetically, if Vladimir Putin, for some reason, hypothetically, was in a position to be able to give orders to U.S. president, right? We're told that President Trump has tried to arrange this summit so that at one point in the summit, it will be him and President Putin in a room with no other Americans. There won't, as far as we understand, maybe not even an American translator there. So if President Putin were hypothetically in some sort of position where he could give orders to an American president behind closed doors, no other American would ever know what those orders were. If he had that sort of magic wand, what would be the thing he would want most? What kind of order would he give?
Well, first of all, we know that the summit is going to start with an extended one-on-one between these two presidents. The thing he wants most is money. Russia is not in good financial shape. Putin is not in good financial shape. So he wants sanctions relief. He wants relief for the sanctions that we put on them for the invasion of Ukraine, and also for some of the things that happened in Syria. That's the number one thing he wants.
And a U.S. president could deliver that.
Well, you know, thanks to the Congress, these sanctions are now legislated, because very soon after President Trump came into office, members from both parties and both houses were worried that he would give this away for free. And so they put them in legislation. So it's more difficult than it might have been. But there are lots of things the president could do by executive order. He certainly wants his occupation of Crimea legitimized, because that would be, you know, a great validation in front of his own people, who are, according to the polls, less enamored of his leadership than they used to be.
And he'd want the U.S. to pull the rug out from under NATO and continue to destabilize the European Union and other Western alliances.
He'd want more trouble between us and our closest allies like Germany. He may want a U.S. and NATO exercises in the Baltic Sea canceled. You know, Kim Jong-un got that. Why couldn't he get that?
Victoria Nuland, would you mind staying with me just for one moment? We have to take a quick break, but there's something that came up today, actually, in the very dramatic Peter Strzok hearings that I wanted to ask you about. Would you mind staying with us? All right. Victoria Nuland is our guest tonight for the interview. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.